All right, welcome everyone. Thank you again for being here. My name is Lauren Williams. I'm Adult and Community Services Manager for the Columbia Public Library, which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. Today's program on social media and its impact on children and teens is presented by Children's Grove, along with the local chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness in honor of National Mental Health Month. This Lunch and Learn series is co-hosted by the library and the League of Women Voters of Columbia, Boone County. Before I turn things over to the League to introduce some of our speakers today, I have a couple of Zoom housekeeping items. To ask questions of our presenter, as usual, we'll be using the chat feature of Zoom. So if you hover over your Zoom window, you should see that speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. Just tap on that and you can then add your question there in chat. Or if you're on a tablet or a smartphone, you may have to tap in the middle of your screen to see those menu items pop up. We are recording this presentation, so it will be available in the next day or two on both the League's YouTube channel and the library's YouTube channel for future viewing. And now I'd like to welcome our moderator, League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County Vice President Scala.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. We've got a lot of interest in this program, and I, among all of you, are very interested, and we appreciate our speakers being here today. We also appreciate the collaboration with Children's Grove, specifically with the Social, Emotional, and Mental Well-Being Committee. And I'm just going to introduce a member of that committee, and I believe you're still president of the board of Children's Grove, Kim Dude, who is then going to introduce our speakers. And we have a little bonus. We advertised Dr. Chad Rose, but he's also involving one of his students, Evan Simpkins. So we're happy to have them here. Kim is retired from the university where she was the director of the Wellness Resource Center that she started back in 1990, and it's the campus prevention office. So, and she also includes in her bio that she's the proud mother of 2 and grandmother of 4, and is married to Mark Lammy, a financial planner. So Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce Dr. Rose.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. This is by far our most popular event, and I can understand why, having 2 kids and 4 grandkids. I can understand why everybody is so interested in this. We're extremely fortunate to have such a wonderful expert. Dr. Chad Rose has been involved in special education since 2002. Dr. Rose was initially employed as a special education teacher at one of the nation's most diverse secondary schools, where he primarily served youth identified with behavioral disorders. He completed his PhD at the University of Illinois with the emphasis on behavioral disorders and quantitative methods. Dr. Rose is currently an associate professor and director of Mizzou's Education Bullying Prevention Labs and director of graduate studies in the Department of Special Education at the University of Missouri. Dr. Rose's research explores predictive and protective factors associated with bullying involvement, bullying among youth with disabilities, and bullying prevention and interventions situated within a multi-tiered system of support. Thank you very much, everyone, and take it away, Dr. Rose.
If I can interrupt, I'm sorry, I left out a key point, which Lauren fortunately put in the chat, and that is that as you develop questions, either questions you have now or questions that developed during Dr. Rose's presentation, please enter them in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that and make sure that he gets to answer your questions. Thank you.
And I will add one thing, that this is also going to be on the Children's Grove website once we have it recorded.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. Excited to be here. I hope everybody can hear me. Yeah, we're good. Okay. And I'm excited that I have one of my undergraduate students with me. Evan is, and we'll get to his part in a second, but I've asked Evan to join us because he is a digital native, and I'm not. So, you know, I have the luxury of straddling that fence, right? I was born in a generation where I didn't grow up necessarily with technology, and I watched it evolve. But over the years, I've had the opportunity to learn technology and stay on top of it, especially given my profession. But anyway, I'm excited to be here. I'm going to go through a couple of things first, a couple housekeeping items. I am the director of the Mizzou Ed Bully Prevention Lab, and we have the pleasure of doing many things in the community. I'm excited to be part of the community here. And our lab is designed to do a couple of things. The first thing is look at policy evaluations in relation to bullying and cyberbullying, to make sure that our schools and districts, and we have some state work that we've been doing to make sure that our policies are in compliance with state and federal regulations, but also substantive enough to impact the lives of kids. The second thing we do is trainings. I do trainings and my team does trainings. And honestly, I couldn't do any of this stuff without my team. I have an amazing team of graduate students and undergraduate students that really make this lab move forward. I just simply am the face of our group. And so we do trainings. You'll hear me say this probably multiple times, but I don't believe that bullying and cyberbullying begins and ends with school bells. And so I think it's a community issue. And that's why my team and I tend to be so present in the community, because we believe that we all need to be speaking the same language to support our youth. And then the other thing that we do is we do skill-based interventions. So I'm not one that will go into schools or go into communities and stand on a stage and tell kids bullying is bad, because they know that. I'm one that really tries to evaluate skills and entrench our interventions within skill development. So teaching kids social communication skills is one of the keys to addressing bullying and cyberbullying. And then we do this for a bully-free environment for all. You know, the concept of bullying and social media use among teens has been an interest of mine for a really long time. You know, I have stories that I could tell you about kids that have experienced some really tragic things online. But I also have stories that I could tell you that of kids celebrating newfound relationships online and newfound interest online. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to take a journey. We're going to go through kind of what social media use is for youth. And I'm going to allow Evan to talk a little bit about what it means to him to be a digital native. But the first thing I want to do is really kind of wrap this around kind of where I situate myself in terms of bullying, because I think that's probably why everybody's here. Everybody's here because they're worried about their kids experiencing cyberbullying. But bullying is really the imbalance of physical or emotional power. There's this intentionality to cause physical or emotional harm, and it's repeated across time or victims. So that's kind of the frame for us to understand bullying. But there's a connection to cyberbullying. One thing that I should note is cyberbullying to me is just another modality for kids to engage or experience bullying. But the thing about this, the repetition is online repetition happens immediately. And that's what's so scary. And we're going to talk about kind of what we can do in relation to that. But I also need to talk about this. We've been debating this for a long time, but this is my theoretical framework for understanding how we develop behaviors. I'm a social ecologist when it comes to understanding groups of people and groupthink. And so what that means is I'm an individual born with individual characteristics, and my behaviors are developed or influenced by the systems, the social systems that I surround myself with. For example, family, my peer groups, my school, my community, and society. And when we think about social media use, and when we think about how social media is entrenched within these factors, all of these factors play a role in how our kids engage in online activities. For example, families could set specific parameters on how kids engage, all the way to societal factors where new and evolving technologies are becoming accessible to kids. And that's one question I have to my undergrads all the time is, how do you decide what social media platform to join? And so society kind of dictates that for us. And then some of the work we're doing right now is embedded within the community. So what does social media and online social interactions look like within a given community? Because we think about these social networks, right? And so at let's say a high school or middle school, we have these networks that are situated within kids knowing other kids within physical spaces, but those networks branch off to kids only knowing others in electronic spaces. And we'll dig into that a little bit today. But really, bullying, cyberbullying is a pervasive issue, meaning that bullying and cyberbullying can impact all of life's domains. And I would guess that's why we're all here. And I would guess that's why people are overly interested in this topic, is because when kids experience damaging things that happen in physical or electronic spaces, it can impact their physical health, their mental health, their educational outcomes, and their social interactions. And we do know that kids that experience bullying in a traditional physical space, there is an overlap between those kids also experiencing online victimization. This is one study that suggests that 93% of kids that experience bullying in physical spaces also experience online victimization. Our data aren't so high, but it's still a large portion of kids that have this overlap. So throughout this, and I sped through that because I think that just adds context to what we're really here for. So to add to this conversation, I have some of these questions for you to consider as we talk. And the first question I have for you is, how do you use social media and how do you decide what platforms to join? I think I would guess that a majority of us on this call and in this webinar have some sort of social media profile, some sort of digital footprint. And so how did you decide what to join and how do you specifically use that? So as you go through, I want you to think about those things. Because for kids and youth, social media and online interaction takes all sorts of different forms. Right, we have kids that are gaming and they're in gaming communities. We have kids that use computers and use our social networking sites. We know that cyberbullying and involvement online can happen through webcams and phones. So it is an ever evolving topic. Here is a slide for the most common apps, the most common social media apps that kids are using today. One thing that I don't have up here is Roblox. I should have that up there, and anybody that's a parent of a younger kid knows what Roblox is. But really, kids are engaging in social media in all sorts of different ways. And I'm not here today to tell you that social media and social interaction is bad, because I think that it can be a very useful tool. But I am here to tell you that we have to monitor it, and I believe that we all need to be active consumers of what our kids are consuming. So if your kids have a TikTok account, you should have a TikTok account. If your kids are on Instagram, you should have an Instagram account. It's just a way to monitor, but also a way to know the ins and outs of a particular app. So here's a piece that's really important for us to understand when it comes to cyberbullying and social media use. Because I'm asked all the time about the outcomes. So here are my thoughts and what some of the data suggests, that it is most damaging for a kid to experience some sort of victimization when something is posted online from someone they know and it's distributed to other people that they know. So if you followed me there, it's if somebody they know posted something, and then that distribution is to other people that they know. So those social media apps that have large followings of in-person networks is one that we would closely monitor. It's also damaging for kids if someone posts something that they don't know, but it goes out to people that they do know. So the piece that is common there is this idea of known. And I'm talking about known in a physical space right now. What kids are most resilient to are if somebody posts something online about them or responds to a comment about them, they don't know this person and it's going out to other people that they don't know. Most kids are resilient to that. And that's a difference between us that aren't necessarily digital natives. And we see people interacting in like these chat rooms or these comment sections, and people are interacting and they're going back and forth. Kids are mostly resilient to that. We tend not to be as much, those of us who aren't digital natives. So I'm not going to go through all of these things, but it is a piece that we should be aware of, the warning signs a kid is experiencing cyberbullying. And so most of those are observable changes in behaviors. That is observable changes in conversations, observable changes in device use, observable changes in wanting to go to school, observable changes in moods. And so what this means for us as parents, and I'm a parent of an 11-year-old who is almost 12 and wanting to engage in social media, what this means is we have to have a strong rapport with our children. The flip side of that is warning signs that kids are engaging in cyberbullying. This is also observable behaviors, but what we're looking for is observable behaviors in this idea of being concerned about popularity or being overly concerned about what people think about them, or also hiding devices when people walk by, or actively laughing at something uncontrollably online. These are just warning signs. It doesn't necessarily mean if you see your kid experiencing these things that they're experiencing cyberbullying or engaging in cyberbullying. Okay, so I did that really quickly because I'm really excited to get to this next section. This next section is something that we're working on a lot. But one thing that I want you to think about as we go through this next section is, how do you socialize online? How do you establish social relationships online? And have you ever developed a social relationship online with somebody that you don't know in a physical space? That could be a chat room, that could be a group, and I'm going to explain that in a second, but that could be some sort of activity group. So here's the thing. Removal of access to devices and removal of access to social media is not the answer. And that used to be our answer a couple of years ago. We used to tell kids, well, just don't have a profile, or delete your profile, or don't get on the phone. That is no longer the answer, because there's this hidden curriculum. There are these social rules and norms that everybody seems to know but aren't directly taught. And there's a hidden curriculum in social spaces too. So kids' social landscape now encompasses both physical space and electronic space. These are two different sets of social skills, but it encompasses their social landscape, and we can't cut one off because there's different social norms within these specific contexts. So kids need to know how to interact socially online. It's part of how they socialize in physical spaces as well. And kids are very aware of how they develop their digital footprint. If you have a kid and they have an Instagram account, for example, you can go to their Instagram account, and I would bet more times than not, your child has some sort of theme, or that it's crafted carefully to depict something that they want to highlight. in comparison to some people that aren't necessarily digital natives, where we just post anything that we want to post. The one thing that we have to understand and we have to work with kids about is this idea of power of language. Language is important, and language development is important in physical spaces, but it's a different set of skills in terms of language online. And so how kids are interacting online may be socially appropriate given the context. And then one thing I want to mention here is not all activity online is social, meaning not everything that kids are doing online is engaging in social media. Sometimes they're doing something creative. Sometimes they're doing something educational, and we should celebrate the division of these things. So if your kids are, for example, creating videos, or my daughter does edits, for example, I think that's super creative and things that I can't do and don't know how to do and requires a specific set of skills. And that could lend itself to future interest. So we celebrate those things. But the main thing that I want to leave you all with, and I'm really excited about this piece because this is something my team and I have been working on and crafting for a while, is our understanding of how kids view online relationships. The first thing I want you to ask yourself is, what does friend mean? Like, what does it mean to have a friend? Because I think that if you really think about it, if you really think about what it means to have a friend, it doesn't necessarily mean that friend has to be there in a physical space. And I started thinking about this a lot because, we have most of our kids are on social media, and they have a group of people that they know. They're involved in public forums. They get involved in activities with anonymous folks. But what I didn't realize is how meaningful some of the relationships are that they develop. And I'm going to tell you a little story about how this all went down. So my daughter came to me one day, and she was really concerned about one of her friends. And she runs into me and she says, "Hey, I need you to do something. One of my friends is threatening to hurt themselves." And I know all of her friends in physical spaces. So I'm like, oh no, who? And she told me a screen name, Cool Ninja something something. And I had to pause for a second, because my response previous to this in her interpretation of friends was, those aren't your friends. Like when she would say something about friends, those aren't your friends, you don't know them. But I could see that she was really distraught by this. And so I realized that she had an emotional connection to someone online that she had never met in a physical space. And it was not my job as her father or somebody that studies this to dismiss her feelings. And so I acknowledged that it was her friend. And then about 2 days later, my wife sends me a picture of a plant. I'm like, cool. And her response to me was, all my friends in my plant group love this. And I'm like, there's that word friend again. And I started to think, are these really friends? And so I asked her later that night, I'm like, do you know these people? And she's like, no, I've never met them. I'm like, do you talk to them? And she's like, yeah, all the time. And I realized that they're filling a void that as her partner, I couldn't fill, right? And they're engaging in what we would consider to be activities that friends would do, even if it's online. And so it was at that moment that I realized that we are now forging relationships, strong social bonds, maybe even friendships in electronic spaces. And so it's for that reason we cannot cut like social media and access to social media off to our youth, because it gives kids an outlet to develop friends and social relationships with people that they may not otherwise have access to, that have similar and like interests, that can help cultivate those similar and like interests into something that we should be celebrating. And so I'm super excited to share that with all of you, because I have only maybe one other group have shared kind of our conceptualization of this. And I think that if we start to believe that our kids can cultivate true lasting relationships online, then we can start to embrace how they're interacting in these electronic social spaces. So with that, I'm going to lead into Evan, and he's going to talk about what it's like growing up as a digital native. Evan, you're just going to have to unmute yourself and tell me when to change the slide.
Yep, sounds good. Hi all, my name is Evan Simpkins. I am an undergraduate student here at the University of Missouri, Columbia, studying elementary education and getting a dual certification in special education as well. Back to that last slide, growing up as a digital native, the first question that we really want you guys to consider is, when did you first start using social media? Social media has become a very big thing in the last 10, 15 years, and has really, you've seen the increase in technology start at such a young age. So we can go on to that next slide, which is talking about the importance. So what? Especially in the last 5 years, we've seen a dramatic increase in the virtual learning and the idea of students really being a part of their stake in technology, their stake online, and their digital footprint being increasing, but also the idea that they are experts in technology. I mean, I'm a digital native myself, but when I go and I talk to my sister, she's talking about a totally different set of tools that she uses to be a digital native. And it's fascinating because like, I thought I was pretty tech savvy, but when talking to her, she's like, oh, well, you just do this, 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 and this. And it's so cool because it's changing. And so we got to really understand the idea that these digital natives, these students, these kids, they're really great and they're an asset that you can use. Our next slide, we're talking about social media, and social media can be a phenomenal thing, and it is a phenomenal thing when it's used properly, but we also want to be able to create safeguards for the chance that if it's not used properly, it could become harmful or unsafe. Going on, just to be pretty plain, a digital native are people that grew up and brought up with the use of technology and internet around them. And so this use of technology and internet has really created a sense of like, oh, well, I have so many different online domains that I can be a part of, and a sense of choice that they can do. But also it creates like this bilingualness of code switching between my online language and how I interact with people online versus how I interact with people in the physical space. And so we use this idea of like a rubber band, how we are stretched in different directions, and how our physical space can stretch in one way and our digital space can stretch in another. So with that being said, there's a lot of amazing things that come from technology, but there's also some harmful things that can present itself. So social media is amazing, and we talked about some of these social media outlets. But there's also some implications there as well. So people can be prone to putting like a social media mask on, or feeling like they need to perform in a certain way on social media so that they can get that power inside the physical space as well. But sometimes when you're so focused on the digital space, it can feel really alone. And so I'm just going to tell you a story about a situation that I was involved with and I got brought into. Is I had a grandma reach out to me. This grandma reached out to me and was really concerned, and had a child, her grandson, reach out to me as well. And this grandson received threatening messages online via direct messages on Instagram with his face on site on pictures of somebody nude. And they were getting threatened about, oh, I'm going to send this to XYZ if you don't give me money. And so they were sending screenshots back and forth of, oh, I just sent it to this person, I'm about to send it to this person, all until he came up to the grandma and he was like, oh, I'm about to send it to this person. And then that grandson finally decided that, oh, I need to talk to somebody. So he called his grandma and was like, hey, don't worry about it, but this might happen. And she was like, whoa, what's going on? A realistic response, right? And so then that grandma was like, whoa, that's crazy, and reached out to me, and we were able to talk about it. But throughout this entire process, he felt like he was really alone, and he didn't feel like he had the correct support system in place. Like, he didn't loop in his parents and stuff like that. So it kind of goes into our next topic about some of the ways that we can prevent this by supporting your digital native. In reality, supporting your digital native, we'll give you a couple more tips and tricks later on, but the foundation for this is trust and communication. And this is the trust and communication really lay a framework for support for your digital native. Being open and honest is super important. I remember when I first was starting to get onto social media outlets, and my mom was considerably fond of the, oh, we're just not going to do it. It adds another layer of complexity. We're just not going to do it. So I had to convince her, and she even had me write out a little essay about like, oh, what are the good things about social media? And so that led into a really good conversation about communication and trust and what to do. And so these are just some of the recommendations from a digital native, especially at that young age, just starting off strong with healthy practices online and establishing boundaries, and then keep that boundary and keep that communication open. And trust is really a true two-way street during this, and making sure to have a tone of you want to understand, and you're here to understand, but not to judge, and you're here to love. Those are some pretty primary foundational things for supporting your child, and especially on the digital space. Teenagers, it gets a little more comprehensive, just because you start giving them a little bit more autonomy. But by having the open conversations in the beginning, you hope that they would want to come to you. And so by giving them the freedom to come to you and to show them that you're there for support, it'll really help you and them create a healthy social media presence. Now we can head on over to the benefits of social media. We've talked a lot about some of the apprehensives, but there's so many great things that can come from social media. There's so many different ways to increase and foster a lasting connection and communication with people. I know personally from my high school friends, honestly, I'm not the best at continuing that communication, but I still talk to a few of them, and I follow a lot of them on social media. And if any one of them were to call me up and be like, hey, look, I'm in a pinch, or hey, look, I need you to do this, I'd be there in a heartbeat, because I feel like I'm still in their life and I'm still present. And then this also goes with like family connection. I know personally, being away at college, like I don't talk to my extended family every day or anything like that, and I don't talk to them probably as much as I should. But the idea of social media is they're able to see and communicate with me and feel like they're in my life, and I can feel like I'm a little bit in their life as well. And so next we're going to go on to promoting creativity and ingenuity. I'm going to talk to you about my sister and how she's been in this huge baking phase lately. Absolutely phenomenal. But she kept on sending me these things. They were like, oh, ideas off Pinterest, because that's the social media that she exercises. And she was able to like look at totally different things on Pinterest and really see like these huge creations. And then she created things just like it and then expanded on it. So social media for her has been an outlet for her to promote her creativity and ingenuity and anything and everything that she wants to do. This also allows us to build relationships online that can translate into the real world and have a real world web. You find people that know people, and allows you to really network. For example, my cousin, he goes to a school back in St. Louis, and he is huge into track. And I went and I saw one of his meets, and we were talking, and he just pointed out like 5 different people that he knew. He never really had met them in person, but he knew based on the networking that he's done about them. And so they went up and had a conversation. So it was really it was an outlet to help him translate that online relationship into the real world as well. And lastly, it creates new avenues to explore newer different activities. I'm going to use an example from one of my students, and this student, he's so bright. I absolutely love him, and he really enjoys dinosaurs, all about the dinosaurs. And you know, his family, they don't love dinosaurs, and that's okay to have different preferences. His friends at school, not super duper into dinosaurs, but he was able to find a group online that was just all into dinosaurs. He was able to learn so much, and he got so invested into it. And so it was really cool to see how this online presence and avenue was able to translate into his real world experience and real world activity. And he was able to go and actually meet up with some of these people to really discuss it.
Thanks, Evan. I was just, am I on mute? No, okay. I was just thinking as you were talking, I had a conversation with my daughter the other day, and we were talking about pictures. And I told her, it was on Mother's Day, and I told her that my mom had a really embarrassing picture of me somewhere. And she's like, oh, can I see it? And I'm like, it's like buried back in some box somewhere. And I realized at that moment that she had no clue what taking photographs included. Like when you had an actual camera, had film, had to go print them, and you didn't know. She's like, you don't know what you took a picture of? And I'm like, no, you just like were surprised, you know, when you got the film back. And it was at that moment that it clicked to me that she had no idea that, you know, you had to be cautious in terms of taking pictures because they all cost money. And so anyway, I don't know what reminded me of that right now, but that's a piece. So one question that I asked to all of my graduate or my undergraduate students, and this is something that I'm going to pose to all of you because I would tell you that I labor over this. What is your thought process when you post something online? I asked all my undergrads this, and there's a wide array of answers. But like if I post something online, I labor over it. I think about it. I'm like, do I really want to say this? What is the tone? And like I think about it. And then most of the time I just don't post anything because it's like I can't get past that thought process. But some of my students, most of which are Evan's age or a little younger, they just post, right? And there's a distinct difference in what people do. And so that leads us into this next thing. What are we going to do, and how are we going to support our youth? And so that's how we teach digital citizenship. This is important, and you know, we rely a lot on our schools to do this, but I think from a parental perspective, we have more stake in the game. Because schools do a pretty decent job of the first point, but the next 2 points are not as great in some of our digital citizenship programs. So I want you to think about, when you work with your kids, 3 pieces. The first one is safety. Safety is, and we'll get into each of these pieces specifically. The first one is safety. The next piece is choice, and the next piece is permanence. I can almost guarantee you that all of you, if you're here because of your children, you've talked to your kids about safety. You've talked to them about sharing personal information, and you've talked to them about the well-being of spending too much screen time, and you talked to them about the importance of physical socialization and when to ask for helps, and giving them knowledge about websites and telling them what to do when they feel unsafe. So we're probably pretty good here. The one piece that gets to Evan's point, though, is we really do need to make sure that our students or our children feel comfortable coming to us when they feel unsafe when something happens online. Because there are reporting mechanisms on all of these social media platforms. You know, we've had the opportunity to work with some of them to help them with tips and tricks and reporting protocol. I think, and some of my colleagues have helped. So it's important that we know how to report. The piece that we have to recognize is this idea of choice. Okay, so kids, all of us, I mean, I say kids because that's probably why we're all here, but all of us have choice in what we post online. We have a choice in the language we use. We have a choice in like inflections different online and tones different online. We have a choice in recognizing our meaning and context. We have a choice in what we download. But one thing that I really talk to my daughter about is we have a choice of what is posted. Like, we can choose what we post. And we can also choose what we respond to. And I mean, I have a personal rule that if I post something and someone posts something on something I post, I can respond to it. But if somebody posts something on their profile that I don't agree with, or if I see some news story that I don't agree with, I tend not to post to that. You know, I also have a different platform than a lot of people do, but I tend not to engage in that type of argument online because I have not found a way that it solves anything. We also have a choice of who you let in. You know, who's allowed to be on your profile, who's allowed to see what information you post. But the thing that I talk to my kids about, and any kid that I work with, is who do you want to be when nobody's watching? Like, because sometimes that's how people feel when they're online, right? Is like, nobody's really watching this. Or if I post this, I want everybody to watch it. Like I want kids to post things that they're passionate about, and be thoughtful about what they post, because of this piece, the permanence piece. And you know, we have all these platforms now that claim that things aren't permanent. They claim that things are deleted after you read them, or after 24 hours. But those things still have a digital footprint. As a matter of fact, if you read through any of those social media platforms and read the fine print, you can see that you can request a detailed transcript of things that have been posted, even if they've said that they were supposed to be deleted. And so it's important for us to know that even if they say it's deleted, it may be deleted on devices, but it still lives somewhere. And even though kids in middle school and even early in high school aren't thinking about their future, they have to think that they're going to do something in the future. And whatever they post online, we don't want that to come back and haunt them. As a matter of fact, we can teach them how to make it help them. If they post things that are creative and celebratory and happy and fun, then it sets them up for success in the future. If they respond to people in a positive way, then it sets them up for success in the future. And so teaching our kids this idea of safety, choice, and permanence, and having discussions with kids around those topics is critically important. So I have a couple of slides here on tips and tricks to understanding socialization among youth. The first piece I have is, and not necessarily online spaces. It's just things about how to establish a rapport with your kids, because I know as a parent myself, sometimes this feels challenging. Sometimes it feels it's hard. You know, I pick my daughter up from school every day, or for the majority of the days, and I started to do this at a young age when she was real young, because I would ask her how her day was, and she would still say fine. You know, in third grade, just dismissing me, fine. And I'm like, that's not a good answer. And so I started asking her specific questions. You know, what made you laugh today? Tell me one exciting thing that happened today. What did you play at recess today? For example, one time I asked her, what did you play at recess today? And she's like, oh, family. I'm like, oh yeah, what'd you play? And she said, I was the dog. And I'm like, oh, well, who decided that? And she's like, oh, it was my choice. And so at that point in time, I got to know kind of how that dynamic worked, right? Because if she would have said, oh, somebody else told me to play the dog, then it would have been a different situation. And so asking these direct questions is important. And also our kids get used to it, because I guarantee you, when you first start asking your kid, when you pick them up from school or they come home from school, hey, what made you laugh today? They'll be put off. But then day 2, day 3, day 4, they'll start opening up and telling you. It's just consistency, and taking that 5 minutes when they come home to ask about their day is important. And I think it's 5 to 10 minutes well spent every day. Even if I'm out of town, I still do this with my daughter. I still call her and ask her questions like this. Okay, so if we get into social media use, some of the things that we need to do to prevent cyberbullying and really concerns among our kids. So, we need to try to keep the device screen as visible as possible. Have conversations, open conversations with your kids. Monitor activity online. This is not necessarily an invasion of privacy. I think it's family dependent, right? It's how you view your parenting. I do monitor my daughter's activity online because she is young, and I want to make sure that she's making the right choices. And so I'll monitor her chats and I'll monitor everything, and I'll go through it quite frequently and ask her about it. I'll say, well, so-and-so said this and you responded this. What did that mean? How did you interpret what this person said? You posted this video in your story. I want to know why. It's not accusatory. It's just having a conversation, because she's still learning. The next thing is inform yourself of the apps. Know what apps kids are using, and be avid consumers of those apps, A, and B, know how to make reports on those apps if you need to. And then always encourage activities away from electronics. I mean, I celebrate the benefits of social media, but also I celebrate how beautiful it is outside today, right? I mean, if you are around this area right now, step outside this morning and it was beautiful. So we need to get our kids to enjoy the outdoors as well. Okay. And then I have a list of some questions that you can ask your kid, or if you're a teacher, you can get into this with some of your students. One thing is, like, how do you spend your time online? Because some kids honestly don't realize how much time they spend online, which is the next question. But like, time passes. And I guarantee you, everybody on this call knows this. When you are scrolling through your social media, time passes differently. And before you know it, you've been on it for much longer than you wanted to. And so one thing that we want to do is ask our kids, how do you spend your time online? And what do you spend your time, how do you spend your time? You should know this if you're a parent, but not if you're a teacher. How do you spend your time when you're not online? And then the next question gets back to a point that I was making earlier. Do you have any close friends online? As a parent, I think this is important to know, because I know most of us as parents monitor our kids' friends in physical spaces, but we also need to know if our children think that they have any close friends online, because we need to start to monitor those relationships as well. Because if they believe that they have close friends online, again, getting back to that digital citizenship, safety, choice, and permanence, they're probably sharing more information from a safety perspective than they would generally. And so it's important to note if they believe they have any close friends online. And then also, have you ever felt uncomfortable talking to somebody online? We need to know, A, if they've ever felt uncomfortable talking to somebody online, and B, what types of things are being said to them that make them uncomfortable. So the last piece I have for you is really quick, and then we can open it up for questions. Making a plan for youth is really fostering communication development, electronic communication, communication in physical spaces. Kids need to have strong social communication skills, and it's our job as adults to help them foster those things. And to do that, we have to teach this kid to learn what they like about themselves. What are they going to celebrate? If they're creating a digital footprint, what good things can they celebrate? The next thing is looking at friends, not necessarily making friends the way that we have here, but ultimately understanding what friendship is and what friendship looks like online versus physical spaces. And then telling them and giving them a strategy for how to talk to adults. How are we going to communicate with adults if something doesn't go as they had planned? And then creating an action plan for all this. All this is available on the Say No Bullying website, and I had an opportunity to create the the book for this. If you're interested, you can reach out to me and I can send you a copy electronically. And so I'm going to give you some parting words here. This is something that I've thought a lot about, and I told you I mention this all the time, but as technology increases and evolves, the environments in which kids can experience bullying has expanded, but also it has increased the importance of our monitoring system as adults, because bullying no longer begins and ends with school bells. And so we have to partner with our schools and our communities in order to be supporting our youth to the best of our abilities. And if you want to use this, that's fine with me. This words of wisdom for youth. My college football coach gave this to me, and I like to close my presentations with this, but he hammered this into us as athletes. As student athletes, he said success is built on three things. The first is doing the right thing, even when nobody's watching. The second is giving your best effort, no matter what you're trying to do. And the third is having class. Wherever you go, know that you're not only just representing yourself, you're representing all those people that have supported you along the way. And so if you ever run into me, you'll know that I live these three things, and these are the three pillars in my household, and if you want to use them, great. But at this point in time, I can take any questions that we have. I think we have about 8 minutes, so I'll try to address any question.
Yeah, it looks like we have one in the beginning that said, how do we know which platforms have networks of known strangers or known people versus strangers? And I can take this one because I've seen a lot of it through just coming up in a digital native era. But automatically, I think all parents should assume that any platform that your child is on is full of strangers until proven otherwise. It's just like a safety net for you and a safety net for them. And so there are a lot of parental guidances that you can do. For example, I know my sister, she only has Pinterest, and that's full of strangers, but she also has Facebook Messenger for kids, and that has to be approved by a parent. So it's full of known people, and known people not only by their child, but also by you as the parent.
Yeah, I'll also say that that relationships, student-youth relationships tend to develop more rapidly in like some of the gaming platforms. So let's say a kid's on Roblox, for example, and they always go and play this certain game on Roblox, and they run into the same people. And so then they start to develop the same types of networks we would in physical spaces, right? If we go to, if we're always at the mall, we run into the same people at the mall every day. And eventually we're going to say, hey, weren't you here yesterday? And they'll be like, yeah, I'm here doing this. And then the next day we're like, hey, good to see you. And then these relationships develop. So I want you to think about how we develop relationships in physical spaces. It's very similar to how kids develop them in electronic spaces. They keep crossing paths in similar domains and platforms and different channels, and they see each other, and they acknowledge each other, and eventually they start to have conversations in the chat. And then from there, what happens is these groups develop, and so then they notify each other when they're online, and then they start to play the same game together. It's really an interesting phenomenon, but like if you think about it in a physical space, it's very much what we do in physical spaces. All right, next question. I know that there are questions coming in, but I can't see them.
One of our listeners commented that there was a lead article in the New York Times today that took a look at the mental health crisis facing adolescents and the role of digital technology, sadness, loneliness, hopelessness. It seems as though what you've presented here is very relevant to this topic.
Yeah,
Have a comment on that?
I do. Yes. I'll tell you just from, how do I say this? A long time ago, when I first started here at Mizzou, there was an unfortunate tragedy locally. in relation to bullying. And some journalists reached out to me and asked me if I would comment on the tragedy, or at least share their story on our social media outlets. And I read the story and I told them no. And I said, because I don't think that it is, I don't think that it shows the respect to the family that I thought it should. And at that point in time, I made it a point to my team that we weren't going to stand on a platform of negativity. And so I tend not to talk a lot about the downfalls, the pitfalls, the tragedies that are associated with bullying and cyberbullying. I will say that in relation to mental health, yes, but also we have to recognize that the New York Times article, is that where it came from, and any other article that's come out recently is on the heels of kids spending time at home isolated due to COVID. And so I think that there's probably some association with that isolation, but also recognizing that, like what Evan said, that kids can feel alone even among thousands and thousands of users, right? But we as people, I don't know that anybody is, I'm sure that all of you have felt this before. When you walk into a room and you look around and there's could be hundreds of people in that room, but you're alone, and you walk to a table and you stand there and you automatically go to your phone and start like acting like you're doing something. That feeling of loneliness that we've all experienced for a short amount of time, even if you're just waiting for somebody for 5 minutes and you're there first, that short amount of time, some kids experience that constantly. And that's why we as adults have to kind of monitor their well-being, because that feeling of loneliness that you've all probably experienced for even just a short amount of time, it's unhealthy. I mean, for 5 minutes is okay, but constantly it's unhealthy. And so that's why we really have to monitor it. And yes, social media use, if we don't break it up, and if we don't get to celebrate the creativity that can happen online, and kids get to share their creativity, and they're only focused on social media use and focused on likes and focused on, how many people are viewing whatever content they're posting, and they're really trying to target being some sort of influencer, then yeah, I mean, I think that it can be tragic. And so that's why we have to monitor and have conversations with kids, because having a conversation with your kid should be fun. Like, even if it's like pulling teeth sometimes, it should be fun, because you get to see what your kid likes. All right, what's the next question?
I just need to check in with Lauren about our parameters time-wise here. Can we continue on for a while, or do we need to stop right at 1?
So if Chad's willing to take a few more questions and go past 1, we can do that. That's fine.
Sure.
Great. Okay. Well, then a good follow-up question to what you were just talking about. One of the listeners asked, do you have tips for having a discussion with your kids about your desire or need to monitor their social media activity, but still keep trust?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I will. So the way I had a conversation with my own child, and the way I recommend is really couching it in a story. Kids understand what's relevant to them, right? And if you tell them that it's important that you monitor what's happening online, not that you don't trust them, but that the world is an ever-changing and sometimes a place that can leave kids vulnerable in online spaces, and that they're your responsibility, then I think that's the way to start your conversation, is saying, you know, you trust them, but you don't necessarily trust everyone. And then, you know, I told my daughter the story of, you know, my nephew, and since this is being recorded and I don't have his permission to share the story, I won't, you know, share his story completely, but he was experiencing some online victimization that went unresolved for quite some time, and it became quite damaging. And so I shared that with her and let her know that that's why I need to monitor. And also what's happened is once she started using it responsibly, and, you know, she does use it responsibly, then I back off a little bit until I notice that either her behaviors have shifted or changed. Maybe she is spending a little bit too much time online. Maybe she withdraws from some family activities because, like, that's the most important thing to her, seemingly. Then I start to pick up my monitoring again. And so it's just telling your kids that you trust them, but you don't necessarily trust everyone, and just being open and honest about what you're trying to do. And also assuring them that if you see something online, if you see them engage in some questionable activity, that you're going to have a conversation about it. You're not necessarily going to have all these sanctions and consequences. I think that's important to be a learning tool as well.
We have another person who asked, how would you approach your child wanting to meet a digital friend who turns out to be a bully, but your child didn't recognize that quality?
I still, to be perfectly honest, I still am on the fence about face-to-face meetings with people in physical spaces. Or, you know, I have a friend that's in an online space. They want to meet up in a physical space. I still have reservations about that. I haven't gone to my ideology on how kids are developing friendships in physical spaces or in online spaces has kind of stopped there. And I haven't quite got to this point to where I'm like, yeah, you guys have cultivated such a great relationship that you should meet in a physical space. I don't know when I will get there. I don't know if I will get there. But if that's something that is going to happen, then I would need to do even more than I do with friends in physical spaces, right? Know the parents, know where they came from, know their story, know who they are, know all these things. And if they turn out to not be what they were online, then we would end that relationship. You know, I mean, that's kind of where we would go. I mean, it would be the same. I would approach it the same way I would if a kid was meeting somebody in a physical space that they knew at school, and then they meet in a different location and social behaviors changed. Because to be perfectly honest, our behaviors shift and change depending on our social environment. So the way a kid engages in behaviors at school may be completely different than they engage in behaviors in some other social setting. So again, I have not jumped that fence yet to endorse having kids meet in physical spaces with people that they only know online. But we're just really starting to kind of peel back this onion.
Another great question. What impact does social media have on the self-esteem of youth, especially young girls?
Yeah. Oh, I will tell you that I'm thankful that I did not grow up in an era of social media use the way it is now. And B, I'm thankful that I did not grow up as someone, as a young lady, young woman given the social media landscape right now. I think that they're given the filters. If you look at some of the filters that are online in relation to women, most of the filters are removing flaws and there are far fewer for like men. The only filter that I'm aware of is like this show yourself a perfect beard and tattoos filter, you know, but like most of the other filters are for women. Like they've completely overhauled to traditional thinking traditionally about women and beauty. And I think it sets up a false narrative, right? I love to celebrate those people online that show that it's a false narrative. But I do think that it sets unrealistic expectations, and that's a conversation that we should be having with our kids. We should be having these conversations with our kids about what's real and what's not, because as you all know, and this is common knowledge, that people post what they want to post due to choice, right? We choose what we post, and we choose how people that we don't know in physical spaces perceive us in online spaces. And so that's something that when we have our conversations with our kids about this idea of choice, we also need to recognize that that not everything is reality. Not everything is as it seems online. And once the other thing we can do to build kids' self-esteem in physical spaces is get them off of online activity for a little while, get them involved in something that makes them feel good, that they enjoy doing, and celebrate that. Give them behavior-specific praise when they do well. Find out what their interests are outside of engaging online, to counteract some of the stereotypical stuff you would see online that really misinforms young women.
Yeah, I'd even add on to that and talk about like this idea of self-esteem and self-confidence. In reality, a lot of ways that you can help and encourage that is creating a social support system, or giving your child the opportunity to help create a social support system with peers, or within a desired group that they feel belong, that they feel like they belong. They can find their identity in something that's not necessarily typically online, because finding your identity online can be really harmful, especially to young girls when they're told this is the standard, this is what you need to be, or else if you don't hit this standard, then you're not worthy. And so the idea of finding a social support system and finding your identity and something other than social media and your online presence is so important.
Yeah, and I want to build on that too, because one of the common themes in many of my talks, especially when we're talking about bully prevention in physical spaces, is for kids to embrace their individuality. I'm guessing that none of you here expected someone with a long beard and I got tattoos all over me to stand up and talk about bullying and bully prevention. But I think it's important that we embrace who we are and teach our kids to embrace their individuality, however they start to develop their identity, to embrace who they are and not kind of force them to do things that don't necessarily match what their interests are. Because we live in an age of sameness, and we all have, right? Regardless of your generation, we all live in an age of sameness when we're growing up. We want to not stand out too much, we want to fit in just enough, but like be as individuals we can within this box until we become adults. And then when we become adults, we get to do what we want, and like individuality is celebrated, right? If we are who we are uniquely, are who we are, then we can make it further. And so I think as parents and as educators, we have to start to embrace like this individuality of kids and embracing their unique qualities, and not stifle them. And I think that's super important.
Okay, thank you. One last question, and that's about resources for parents. How can parents, you mentioned the importance of being familiar with numerous online platforms, and especially new ones as they come up. And then in the example that Evan gave, where a grandma turned to him for help. So the overall question would be like, how can parents find out about these things, and who can they turn to for help when something goes wrong?
Mhm. Well, you can always contact us. You know, like I said, I'm assuming that everybody on this call is from the local community, but we can be a community resource. My team is around, you know, but beyond that, stopbullying.gov is a really great resource. The Pacer Center is a really great resource. And if you follow our social media, Evan is actually one of the co-leaders of our social media accounts, or all of our social media accounts on our website. And we're going to start posting more about tips and tricks and strategies and all that. We have a campaign this summer that we're going to start creating info sheets, and some of those info sheets are going to be around social media use. The other thing that I would do is when you join an app or any of these social media outlets that you're on, I would actively look at their help page and their settings page to see where to make reports, and to see and don't be afraid to read those tiny words in their terms of use, because that's important. I know it takes a long time, but I would go to each individual site and see kind of what their resources are that they have. Like, for example, Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all the major players have a lot of resources available.
Well, thank you very, very much. And thank the audience for hanging in with us. And we really appreciate your time and Evan's time. And we look forward to making this available, as we mentioned at the beginning, through the League of Women Voters, through the library, and through Children's Grove's websites. So if you enjoyed this, share the information with your friends and they can access it that way.
Yes, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Take care, everyone.